Yes, Facebook, Google, all the online platforms can actually read your mind and understand what you're thinking and discover your intentions. And this is something that is useful and scary at the same time. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. We talk frequently about social manipulation and engineering and how you can use the way humans interact and think to gain influence in business, career, or just feel like you have a little bit more control over your own life. And I was on a message board and I made the claim that Facebook can read your mind and doesn't want to lose you. So a lot of folks are getting banned on Facebook. They're getting banned on different platforms for saying things that don't fit the narrative, that don't align to the underlying story that is whatever the current narrative is. And the perception of the individual is that they've been banned or ostracized or excommunicated from the platform for their problems, and that's a punishment. And what I'm arguing is that these platforms are using techniques, they're really automating techniques that happen in day-to-day society. If you're part of a church group and you come in dressed audaciously and you're making wild claims that are contrary to the beliefs of that particular religious system, they will push you out of that system as punishment for not conforming, not being a good and faithful servant. And that is a function of society that we have to understand exists when we're inside of some kind of community or group. So when you're on Facebook, when you're on LinkedIn, when you're using Google, we have to understand that those platforms have a certain control or desire for control. And if you go outside of what those platforms have defined as normal, they will punish you. Now, the reason Google wants a certain normal, whether it's search engine optimization or whether it's what you post on YouTube, is because Google's main revenue source is advertising. Now, they have a lot of technology that they lease out around the advertising, but essentially they make a lot of money on selling advertisements. Now, advertisers are very fickle, and they certainly don't want their wholesome family ad to show up on a pornography site, and they certainly don't want um, the pornography to show up on a family friendly site. So there are these boundaries put into place. Now I gave you these very broad uh, ranges of scope, but it could be as nuanced as a company who professes to be very liberal not wanting to be seen on a conservative website. So they're going to put pressure, not through some nefarious behind the scenes means, while that can happen, but they'll put pressure on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Google to not allow certain content. This is something that we've used in today's ideological identity politics in order to try to persuade the world around us. So here's some concepts. If you understand that every human is trying to control the world around them so that it produces central gain, so gain for yourself, and that a business is an extension of an individual or a small group's desires or manifestations in the world, then you will see that someone like Elon Musk, someone like uh, Mark Zuckerberg, their personalities will reflect in the environment, not necessarily because they're demanding it, but because, for example, employees will want to impress the boss. So they'll move according to the perceived notions of what is important to that boss. Those individuals could have outside pressure. So, for example, you may not be aware, but LinkedIn, Facebook, all these platforms have federal contracts, government contracts, and they receive money from DARPA. They receive money from military and public service organizations. In fact, during the election year, they receive a large amount of money from political candidates. And so there is a desire to please. And you might be saying, well, Elon Musk doesn't need to please anybody. Well, no, they do. They need to please the powers to be in order to glean some of that power with the desire to then one day have enough power to be their own person. And this happens at all levels. You have to understand this is there and it's beneficial to understand because it helps you navigate this world as it is rather than you might want it to be. So, when it comes to these platforms, how do they read your mind? Because the better you can understand an individual, the easier it is to persuade them, to invite them, to otherwise modify their behavior without coercion. So, for example, if a kid wants candy, you offer candy in exchange for activity. That's, parents do that all the time. Little Timmy, there's cookies on the counter cooling off, and little Timmy, if you clean your room, you can have some cookies. Now, these rewards aren't necessarily good or they're not necessarily bad because, training a kid to reward themselves with candy could lead to obesity in the future because their reward system has been programmed to do something that's not good for them. So, for example, these platforms are offering to small businesses an opportunity to do very sophisticated marketing and targeting of prospective customers. And there are so many people on these platforms. So there's this fantasy that these platforms are going to be a way to access customers, but people's brains shortcut. So they think that posting on these platforms will attract customers because they don't want to pay for advertising, not realizing that the advertising is the only way to reach the customers on these platforms because of the nuances of the volume of content and the nuances of the control mechanisms in place for certain desired content. And so, how do they read your mind? Well, every interaction, every comment, every like is a kind of a checkbox in an algorithm that profiles the individual user. And what are these profiles called? Well, in the Google environment, it's called the cohorts. In the Facebook environment, it's the audience targeting. But they are reading your mind and trying to predictively put you in categories so that when an advertiser comes along, that advertiser can reach a specific category. So, for example, there is a rural escapee. So, if you're looking at the PRISM categories that are used in marketing, these are sociographic, psychographic, demographic categories. You'll find that you can say, I want to reach a certain customer in this category and simply go reach them by paying for advertising. And the platform itself will curate the quality of the data because data quality, privacy, all that stuff is very often a requirement. But it's a requirement to make sure the machine is functioning well so that advertisers can reach buyers in a marketplace. Now, it doesn't have to really function that well because, if a conservative marketer wanted to reach conservative users of Twitter, for example, they may not find as many as they want. Same thing with Reddit and all these other platforms. Now, by the time you listen to this, all these platforms could be gone because this is the way it's always been. At one time, it was about controlling newspapers. If you controlled the newspapers, you can control what people read or what people see. You can create and transform the perception of a population. Now it's more distributed because there's all these social media platforms. But here's my bigger point. The behavior you have when you use these platforms builds a profile, and that profile either matches or does not match the desired audience that these companies want to reach. We very often forget that social media platforms, video sharing platforms, are companies that want to reach certain audiences. At the point where it is unprofitable to reach an audience, perhaps they're getting social pressure through an ESG. Perhaps they're getting social pressure because the political candidates that advertise on their platform who spend a lot of money aren't going to spend any money if they don't believe they can reach a certain audience. So the platform itself curates the audience. This is no different than what we teach about building your own media, maintaining your Rolodex, connecting with the right people. Now, they the reason these platforms have such control and power because there are millions. In fact, there are country-sized populations on these platforms. And so yes, they want your obedience, they want your attention, they want you to feed the machine. What do I mean by feeding the machine? They want you to post content so that they have something to wrap around advertisers because the advertisers know how to make customers. Now, not all of them. There's a bunch of rank amateur advertisers out there that are just spending money. But the advertisement itself, if it works, generates leads, generates sales, and then you don't need to post any content on the platform. Sure, you could hire a couple of interns to post some content just to confuse your competitors to think that you're getting organic traffic when really you do the math and the analytics and you understand where customers come from. Just like 50 years ago, people would just buy a mailing list. They would get a hotline names of recent customers of a competitor's product, and they would send an advertisement, and that's how they'd get customers. Now, of course, you see ad men on TV, and they talk about brand advertising and these fancy campaigns. That's the exciting part, but that doesn't usually happen in environments where they are uh, really doing like a direct response marketing, or they're really doing strategic methods like we're talking about here. Now, how do you use this understanding that these platforms censor in order to better reach your target customers? How do we use this to gain influence in your marketplace? How do we use this to reach decision makers who can hire you or make a big difference in your career? Well, it is not by the common means in which people describe these environments. So you're going to hear you can get rich, you can be a creator, and the more content you create, the better chance you have of reaching somebody. That does work if you have unlimited pockets to spend into. What works better is to simply make a list, and this is what's called the Dream 100 system. And I've talked about it on our marketing side, but you're going to make a list of those individuals who can positively influence the outcomes of your particular situation. Who is it that can get you the education that you need? Who is it that has the contacts? Who is it that is opening doors for other people? Who is it that can open doors for you? And then you cultivate the business relationships with these individuals. So you focus all the resources you have on a handful of individuals, 100, maybe 150 individuals. And then from there, you look at how you can deliver service to them. So rather the self-serving interest that many of these platforms prey upon, and what do I mean by that? These platforms prey upon thirsty people who desire attention, who want people to recognize them, who want people to notice them. You take those behavior traits and you apply them in a world where you've curated the people you're going to interact with. And yes, it still might mean reaching out to them on these platforms, but it also might be reaching out to them directly. Now, when I was doing a lot of business development, I would notice a target customer recognized in the newspaper, and we'd take a clipping out of the newspaper, and we'd write them a letter and say, "Wow, you've done a great job." We have to be sincere, by the way. You can't just blow smoke up their butt. But I'd say, "Look, you did a great job. So I'm so happy for you. You've, finally being recognized for this thing that we know you've been doing for years. Great work." So you're now giving them that personal recognition. You might be saying, "Well, why would people want to be recognized by a perfect stranger?" And it's a valid question, but they go online and show their boobs, and they go online and talk about the job that they love, and then next week they're laid off and they still, it was a great experience. I'm so happy to get laid off because it opens up new opportunities. People are lying to themselves on these platforms, and they're just thirsty for attention. And if you can give them attention in a positive way that is constructive, you very often can shift the narrative in an environment that can't measure your every move, in an environment that's more tangible and meaningful. And yes, this could be as simple as when you meet somebody you haven't seen in a long time, is that you actually remember something about them, that you make the investment to say, "Oh, hey, how have you been doing? I noticed you were in the paper recently about a presentation you did. Great work. You deserve this. You've done great." And then you leave it at that. You've connected in a meaningful way. You're not insincere. It takes effort on your part to keep track of what these people are doing. But if there's a mutual benefit to gain, perhaps you can help them solve a problem. Perhaps there's entertainment value in knowing the person. Perhaps there's an emotional connection because these are skills you can practice at the family level. You'll start opening up doors. You'll feel more connected. You'll be the go-to person when they have problems and challenges that they need solutions for. You'll be able to connect them with other people in your network. They will connect you with people in their network. And then rather than having a LinkedIn account with 500 connections with people you've never met before, you'll have a handful of 10, 15, 20, even 30 individuals who are closely associated with the goals and objectives that you have. Rather than waiting for Facebook to shadow ban you or to knock you off the platform because you said something courageous, you'll ultimately be in an environment where maybe you have a prospect newsletter, or maybe you're able to meet at a fraternity meeting or a community meeting, and you're able to catch up with people real time on things that actually matter. Rather than being thirsty, desiring attention, feeling like you're a failure because no one's recognizing you, and the last YouTube video you didn't go viral, and you can just relax and do some meaningful work. Do something that's useful. You can rest in the comfort of knowing that you are helping your clients, that you're solving problems for your employer, that you're making the connections necessary to do meaningful work rather than basically self aggrandizement and ego stroking on the social media platforms. Now, don't get me wrong. It is extremely clever, and I am very impressed by these platforms feeding you the dopamine and regulating your serotonin through what alerts they show you and measuring your interactions. And there's nothing wrong with doing those things, but as an individual who wants independence, an individual who wants to function inside of liberty, an individual who wants to think freely, you must understand that the social media and video sharing platforms are tools of manipulation. They're being used by governments, they're being used by private organizations, they're being used by individuals to manipulate the masses into a narrative that is being defined by someone else. If you finally want freedom, if you want influence in the marketplace, then you have to build your own narrative and develop an environment for influence. Now, yes, there'll be people in that sphere of influence. For example, I have 4 or 5 thousand people on a newsletter, and there's podcast listeners, and there's some of those folks. They'll never be customers, and they're being influenced by these ideas and concepts. And I have a responsibility to deliver things of value so that you can benefit from these things. And then as those people go through life and they have life changes and they realize that there's a situation that they are in need, they'll know who to come to. I do that through an automated means. I do that through marketing systems. But ultimately, in my day to day life, while I'm not as good at it as I'd like to be, because it does take time and effort, I do try to cultivate the individuals even my enemies. I will try to not win them over. I don't need to have their blessing in per se. But I often will put them in situations where they'll question their hatred or their frustration. It's nothing wrong with having a few nemesises, but I like to keep them on their toes. There's individuals in my business network where I want to make sure that they're doing well. I want to make sure that my vendors are profitable and that they're growing their businesses because they're a valuable resource to my organization. But I also want to be aware that they can fail, and so I'll have backups. There are strategies that we're teaching in the strategic relationships elements that if outsiders saw this, they would think you're being manipulative, that you're being callous, that you're shaping a world around you to benefit you in the best way possible, and not realizing it that every person on the planet is doing that thing. What we're doing that is different is more an Ayn Rand enlightened self-interest, and then understanding and studying the system so that we know where we can navigate our goals and outcomes to best serve our audiences. Not only to best serve our audiences, but to be working within the realistic nature of our social systems in order to get the results that we're looking for. Rather than demanding somebody change, we change ourselves, we adapt, we improve ourselves, we grow as individuals so that we can gain for what us would be a collective good. Not necessarily a collective good for everybody in the world, because that's a subjective measure, but for your goals and objectives that you've stated and sat down with your family and discussed, and for your goals and objectives within business, your goals and objectives within your career, that you're actually achieving these things in a timely fashion rather than being at the whim of some political system, being at the whim of some kind of social system or some kind of platform. When you understand what I'm sharing with you today, and I know we haven't had a lot of time together, so if you want to go into depth about these topics, you can do a consultation or you can visit at www.insidestrategicrelations and become a part of our members program. But ultimately, are we creating a world for ourselves that is advantageous to the outcomes that we desire? And while it sounds very selfish, again, it's no different than what Elon Musk is doing and what Mark Zuckerberg is doing. Um, but are we doing it in a way that is sustainable? Are we doing it in a way that builds strong business relationships? Are we doing it in a way that fulfills our desires and fulfills our long term aspects and that would stand the judgment of scrutiny? That's the biggest key. A lot of this shadow banning that's being done, a lot of these silencing groups is extremely dangerous. I'd rather know somebody is my enemy because of what they've said than have them fear saying something uh, for any reason. If someone is a racist, I'd rather know they're a racist than have to wonder. Now I don't have to wonder because I'm not walking around thinking about what other people are thinking. I'm worried about more concerns about what I can do to improve my situation or what I can do to stay on track with my goals. Again, I'm using the techniques that I'm sharing with you. We can go into that at another place. But you don't want to be used by the system. You don't want to be an NPC. You don't want to be somebody who fits into a cohort for the benefit of some third party at the detriment of you as an individual. So I hope this has given you some perspective. And please think about these programs, take notes, and then ask questions if you have any, because strategic relations is something that usually was out of the hands. When I first learned about this stuff, I didn't even realize this stuff existed. And then I started learning the psychology and I started learning about sociology and the power of influence and how human mind works and the power of persuasion. And I realized that the world is a theater. I've heard it was a theater, but it's actually a theater, and you can be the director. You don't have to be an actor. You don't have to be an extra. You don't have to be an NPC. You can actually be the director. You can be a master of puppets. You can be the leader, the master of at least your destiny. You can make a difference in this world. You can have significance. You can be remembered past your death. You can make yourself immortal. These are the things that we help you do here at Inside Strategic Relations. I'm Justin Hitt, and if you want to ask me a personal question, we have consultations. We also have where you can just simply go to the website at www.insidestrategicrelations, go to the contact page, and ask questions. I love to receive your questions because it helps me understand the perspective of your situation and the world how you see it so that I can better understand the world as it is. I can deliver you valuable podcasts, videos, training programs. We have coaching programs. We can work with you to help you achieve more and to help you reach more. Now, how do we do this? Again, it's through building strong and profitable business relationships. Business is the structure, relationships is the value, and ultimately, the win win mutual gain is the currency. I want to thank you for listening and being a part of the podcast here at Inside Strategic Relations. I'm always looking forward to your questions. This podcast syndicates to thousands of individuals who listen to it every week and more than 15 different platforms. So do be sure you go to the website to ask your questions. I'll be more likely to see them there. And thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next podcast.